Okay, so if you had a chance, I opened this up yesterday. What we want to talk about is talk about line and curve creation in Civil 3D today, which is really not true Civil 3D objects in the sense that you have, that we were looking at the other day. We were looking at those surfaces and those kind of things. Those are more Civil 3D objects. These lines and curves are just normal AutoCAD lines and curves, but they can be converted into Civil 3D objects. So you can use them to create what's called a parcel or an alignment or a feature line or even a break line. So we are going to be getting those kind of things more and more. But they've got some really cool tools that you can utilize for lines and curves. And then, of course, the big thing about them is labeling. So probably the biggest area we're going to talk about is labeling today. That's a little bit tough at first once you get started in it, and hopefully I'll show you the ins and outs of those. And we're going to be utilizing lots of labels. Everything is labeled or has a style associated with it, so you're going to get used to this by the end of the semester. So we're going to talk first about creating lines, and that they've got a whole slew of routines in here, but I'm just going to highlight the creating them by northing and easting, bearing, angle, from end of object, tangent, and perpendicular. These are all great little tools. And then curve creation between two lines from end of object, or they have what's called a curve calculator. So then when we get into the labeling aspect, we're going to look at adding line and curve labels. And then the big deal is editing them. They're not going to typically be perfect. So you got kind of two ways. You can do what's called edit the label properties or edit the label styles. And the styles are the things that are a little bit more involved. So you can think of these like basically dimensions. So they are kind of very similar. And they have a style that drives them, just like a dim style. And they're every bit as complex as a dimension style is, but the dialog boxes look completely different. The good news is on Civil 3D, once you've kind of seen one of these dialog boxes, they will look pretty much the same. So you'll start to figure these out after a while. And then the other thing we'll take a look at is adding tables. And you can add what's called a line and a curve table. And then you've got properties that you can edit to that, and then renumbering what they call tags. So that's kind of where we're headed. So let's, if you haven't already, like I said, have these available. That schematic, we're going to look at that first, and then we're going to look at the final as a secondary. And let's go ahead and fire up Civil 3D if you don't already have it fired up. And unfortunately, my screen, since it's a laptop, it's not real huge. But I'll try to make it as visible. So like I said, if you guys have any questions while we're getting into this, just let me know, okay? So hopefully, you have your tool space open. Remember, that's going to be critical. Now, really today, because we're not working with Civil 3D objects, it's not going to be as critical, but we're going to see that there's things we can deal with it. First off, you went to settings. We need to check something there. So you just opened a brand new drawing, go to your settings tab of your tool space and right click on your drawing name. And so you will get this that pops up, this shortcut that says edit drawing settings. So you'll get this dialog box. This is your drawing setup. So there's different tabs. We talked about that the other day, units and zones and those kind of things. Primarily the one I want you to navigate to is what's called ambient settings. And the one that's really will get you is the one called angle. So if we drop down here, you're going to find angle down here. And their default template, for some reason, has this set to a decimal degree. So what that's doing for you as a user is when you're entering a number like, say, 12 degrees, 32 minutes, and 3 seconds, it expects you to put that in a decimal format, which is very inconvenient for us to work in. Because everything else is usually in a degree, minute, second format. And the beauty is when we type it in, we just type it in as if it's a decimal number. So this is not allowing you to do that. So what we want to do is if we want to turn any angles, we want to make sure that we change that to a DMS format. And that's very important, okay? So you could technically create a template file that would have that automatically set for you. But for some reason, like I said, Civil 3D, the people that wrote it don't do that. So make sure that you do that for today. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that and close that. All right. So we should be at the Home tab, and we're going to spend most of our time right here in this Draw section. And the other thing that will be important, if you're not familiar with it, is your O-snaps. So down in the status bar down here, you should have your O-snap tools, and make sure that you know how to set these guys and or turn them off. And if they're not set down here, or turn them off by just clicking, you can also take your cursor into your graphics area and hit the shift key and then right click on your mouse, and you'll get this shortcut that'll pop up. So this allows me to do an override O-snap anytime I want to. Okay, so I'm assuming everybody knows how to do those. All right, so let's take a look at the line commands. If we open this guy up, this is like your normal line command in AutoCAD, but I'd say it's kind of on steroids. It's got a lot more going on there. So you've got line by point range, point object, point name. In order to use these three, you have to have point objects in your drawing. So these are Civil 3D point objects, which we'll talk about points next week. So we're not going to work with these yet. We'll talk about those next week. One we will do today is called northing and easting, and this is convenient because you can just type in a northing value and an easting value. So you're kind of used to this in using AutoCAD. The only difference is you work in an XY format, and also you always have to put X comma Y. Well, here you're going to enter your northing and then hit enter and then enter your easting. So it's a little different from the input standpoint. And if you had this set up into like a state plane coordinate system, you could use what's called grid northing and easting, or latitude and longitude. These won't be available to you unless you set those up. So we're not going to utilize these either. So another big one would be create line by bearing, create line by azimuth, create line by angle, create line by deflection. These are going to be very definitely useful to us. We're going to use the bearing and the azimuth one today just to kind of get you the feel for that. Angle and deflection, this is why that was important to set those, the ambient settings up to decimal degrees, because if you're using this guy, it's not going to work right for you. Station offset, if you have an alignment in your drawing, you can do things by station offset. I'll be showing you that when we get to alignments. So we're going to come back to some of this. And they have what are called side shots, extension, but there's a couple of really cool ones. Line from end of object is a good one. Line from a tangent arc, or yeah, I think it has to be an arc or a line. And then create perpendicular. Now you can do a lot of these things with snaps as well, just normal AutoCAD snaps, but there's some conveniences in here. So we'll take a look at this northing and easting here in a minute, but I want to show you a couple of very simple ones. Let's go to the bearing one. So if you're just going to create line by bearing, all you have to do is we're just going to pick a point anywhere. And notice what you do, then it shows you your grid, which is kind of cool. Shows you your instrument, then it shows you your quadrant. So when you're using bearings, you have to reference the quadrant you're in. So you can kind of either just pick in the quadrant you want to be in, or you just know the quadrant numbers. So northeast is 1, southeast is 2, southwest is 3, and northwest is 4. But you can just as easily or conveniently just click. So all you have to do is, if I want to go a bearing northeast, I just have to tell it the quadrant first. So I either type in 1 or I just click, and then it comes back and says, okay, specify the bearing. Well, if the bearing was, let's say, 30 degrees, 5 minutes and 10 seconds, we would just type in 30.0510. So that knows what I'm talking about there. It's not reading that as a decimal. It's actually reading that as 30 degrees, 5 minutes, and 10 seconds. So then you hit enter, and then you just give it the distance. You can drag the distance out if you don't know it, or if you know an exact distance. Let's say if I want to go exactly 300 feet, there's my distance. And then it basically moves me to the next point, and I'm free to do that again. So if you have a bearing or a boundary that you're just traveling around, this is a really nice way of doing that. Or you have a quad traverse, perhaps. It's the same thing. It just moves you to the next point. So when you're done, you can just hit the escape key and escape again, and that'll get you out of there. Okay. So this line now is truly at the bearing that we put it on. I'm going to show you another little tool that we're going to utilize. If we go to the Analyze tab, go to the Analyze tab, over here in the Inquiry section, they have some neat inquiry tools that are built into Civil 3D. One is this inquiry tool, but we can't use that. That is going to be dealing with Civil 3D based objects, so we don't have those yet. But we do have this little guy right here, which will list out line and arc information. So if you select this tool, and you select that guy right there, notice at the bottom it tells you the distance and it tells you the bearing. And notice it tells me it's north 30, 05, 10 east. So it did exactly what I wanted. Okay, is everybody getting that to work? All right. When you're done, you can just hit escape. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go back to my home tab. Equally, I'll show you if we do a bearing. If we do a bearing, excuse me, an azimuth. I'm going to create an azimuth from a line. I'm just going to snap to the endpoint of that line. And notice it gives me the azimuth tool. So you got to remember, this is based on what's called azimuth north. So, and that would be an ambient setting. If you were using azimuth south, you could switch that. So it's projecting that into the north direction, measuring the angle off of that. So azimuth and azimuth north always turn clockwise, but you can turn a negative azimuth. So if I wanted to go 30 degrees that way, I would have to type in -30, or I could type in 330. So it just depends. So let's say I wanted to go azimuth like down here. That would be like 171 degrees, 12 minutes and 30 seconds, just making that up. Go ahead and hit enter, puts me there, and then of course it's asking me for my distance. So again, you can eyeball distances, just drag it out, and you just will stay in that routine until you're done. Okay, so those guys are created basically the same way. One's an azimuth, one is a bearing. And again, another really cool tool, if we go to the Analyze tab, over here they have this guy called angle. So you just click on the two lines, and it spits out the acute and the obtuse angle between those two. So you can see what I've got on there, 38, 52, 40. Okay, so if I'm looking at something or I think something could be wrong, that's a good way of looking at it. All right, everybody getting those to work? Okay, so we have back at the Home tab, another little cool tool is create from an end of object. So this is really nice. You can use this tool to go from an arc or from a line to a line. So if I click on this and I just want to go from the end of that, it just tells me then what distance I want. It knows the direction. I can drag that distance out, and there it is. Now it actually added a segment to it. Okay, so it didn't push the endpoint out. Okay, now if you were doing that off of an arc, you would have a tangent. You would have a tangent line off of that. So that's a cool way of extending off an arc, which we're going to see kind of how to use that today. Okay. Another tool, let's see, is create line tangent from a point. So for instance, let's see this. Draw a little 3-point arc anywhere. I'm just going to 1, 2, 3. And let's say you wanted to draw a line tangent to this arc from its midpoint. Okay, so what I can do is then go into my line tangent from a point. You select the arc or a line, and then it wants to know what your point of tangency is. So I'm going to do a shift, right click, go to midpoint. So that's the point that it's going to be tangent to, and then I can just drag out the distance or tell it the distance. Notice no matter where I drag it, it goes tangent. That's a really awesome little tool. Now, what they're really utilizing is things like your AutoCAD snaps. I mean, you can do a lot of this using your tangent snaps, but these tools are really more convenient for the way you would work. Okay. Here's another really neat tool, and we'll use this today quite a bit. This is called create a line perpendicular from a point. Okay, so again, you can snap something perpendicular, but let's say I wanted to go perpendicular to the midpoint of this line. I just select the line, and then I select the midpoint, and no matter what my distance is, it's going to shoot it out perpendicular. Now, if you were perpendicular to an arc, if I go perpendicular to an arc, it's going to do a line what we call radial. So if I go, there's my arc, and I want to go from, let's say, the end point of that line. Again, just measure the distance out. I could say I want to go 500 feet. And that line is radial. And what that means is that line would run through the center of this arc. Those are all pretty cool tools. Okay, so those are your line tools. Anybody have any questions? We're going to utilize those here in a minute to construct some stuff, and then we'll get into the labeling. Any questions? Okay, keep in mind, did I hear a question? Okay, keep in mind, none of these objects that you're creating are civil 3D objects, so to speak. They're just normal AutoCAD objects, you know, lines and all of that. So we're going to take a look at some of your curve tools. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this. So they don't have as many, but right here is our curve tools, and they have create between two lines and between on two lines. They're kind of similar. You can create through points. You can do what's called a multiple type of curve, which would be what we would call compound curves. And then they also have a compound reverse curve routine. We'll get into some of those later. I just want to keep that pretty simple. So really, I just want to talk about between two lines today and from the end point of an object. That's a nice one. Then they also have this really cool little tool called the curve calculator. Let me go and show you a couple things about curves, because some of you may or may not have a real understanding of those yet. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a little picture here. So when we talk about curves in the civil world and like the surveying world, you're going to have certain parameters that are given to you. So let me see if I can draw. Let's see if I can draw one of these guys. I don't know. This is hard to draw arcs on here. I'm going to see if it'll let me. Yeah, okay, that's an arc. So associated with that arc would be a couple of things. One would be, I'm going to show you the major key areas of that arc. So you would have this guy here and this guy here. Okay, so you have your center point down here and this guy, which is called your radius. So you have the radius. That's usually one of the defining parameters for an arc. You have this guy, which in surveying and civil engineering is referred to as delta. That's your central angle. Now also, if you have a tangent coming into this, let me kind of draw the tangent. So you have a tangent coming into this and a tangent going out of this thing. If I extend this tangent this way, and I extend that tangent this way, like that, where they intersect, this is also your delta angle up here. So that's called your deflection angle. So this central angle and that angle are the same. So for surveying, that's pretty important. They also have a variable from that point there to where the curve starts. That's called your T. That's your tangent. And we're going to see how some of these are going to be useful to us today, tangent. Then we also have the bent distance around this thing. That's defined as L, your length of arc. And then we also have the straight shot distance from here to here, and that would be your chord. Oops. So you have quite a few parameters, and you guys that'll be taking a route surveying course, you'll talk a lot about these, but I'm going to introduce them a little bit today because they're kind of important, because Civil 3D is going to talk to you in this term. So again, central angle, radius, distance, which these two things are known pretty much the most. You don't normally design around an L. You don't normally design around a chord. Some people use T, but these are the most common right here. Okay, and you have used the fillet command, which is very much just a radius kind of design. So if let's just grab two lines. Don't worry about their size or anything. I'm just going to create a line here, and then I'm going to do another line like this. Okay, so we can put an arc in here. Now you can use the fillet command. We've been using that for a long time. This basically right here would be the fillet command. So you just select that guy and you select that guy. But then notice now you have all these other properties. Some of them I talked about, some of them I didn't, but you have tangent, external secant, degree of curve, chord, length of arc, middle ordinate, I'm not even sure what that distance is, and then you have radius. So if you use the common thing, the radius, you would just tell it, let's say I want a radius of 500 feet. So this is no different than the fillet command, but you can use those other routines to do it. And I'm gonna show you how we can get into some of those. So for instance, let's see, we're gonna do a curve from the end of a line this time. So I'm gonna do a curve from the end of an object. So this time what we're going to do is select this straight line right here, and we're going to use a radius of, again, let's go ahead and we'll use 500 feet. So then it's going to need another parameter to be able to define that curve. So we have chord, we have delta, we have external. So let's go to delta. This is the central angle. So if delta is turning to the left, say that would be putting the curve up this way, that would be negative delta, because the left angles in the civil world are going to be negative. If we wanted our delta to go this way, that would be a positive delta angle. So let's enter a delta angle of, let's say, negative 50 degrees, 10 minutes, and 30 seconds. And that went the wrong way. It didn't do what I wanted it to do. Maybe I didn't enter the negative. But anyway, that's another way of doing it. Hopefully it'll work for us. Normally it should go. Maybe I didn't enter the negative. But, and it might have to do with the radius. So you can see some of these tools are going to be a little bit difficult to use. So what's kind of cool is if you have curves, such as those curves, you can go to this guy called the curve calculator. And what this guy will allow you to do is put in certain parameters. So let's say you have a radius of a certain value. Let's see. All right, let's put a radius in of 500 feet. And we have a delta angle. Let's see if we can put a delta angle in there. It's going to let me do it. It's a fixed, let's see. Delta, and there it is. If I put a delta angle, let's say of, let me do it. Let me put that one in. Let me see. There I go. I had to take it and set the radius to the fixed property. So once I do that now, let's say if I put in 50 degrees in here. When I type in 50 degrees and hit enter, what it will do is it should count, no, it didn't take it. Okay, once I type in the values, 50 degrees of the 500-foot radius, what it's going to do is show me, calculates the tangent distance, the arc length, the chord distance. So it does a lot of work for you. So if you're actually trying to design a curve before you actually go in and lay it out, you can kind of see what it's going to do for you here. So again, we probably won't be using that curve calculator too much, but that's a good way of getting your information. You can also, if you go back to your Analyze tool, and you go to this guy, your curve guy here, it'll give me most of that information when I click on it. So notice there's my tangent, my chord length, my bearing of my chord, my arc length distance, my radius, and my delta angle. So all of that is shown to you. Okay, so that's based on an object that's already existing. Okay. All right, any questions anybody has on that? You can see, obviously, I don't use that curve calculator too much. You got to, it's a little kinky because you got to kind of make sure you got one object unfixed and then do the other one. All right. So with those tools in mind, what I'd like to do is jump over, and I want to start working on some like a little property line, I know, or property, and we're going to break it up into some line work. So I'm going to try to show you guys how to do things. Everybody follow me okay so far? Any questions?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, so if you've got objects on your screen, you might just want to erase everything because we're going to kind of start this in a bigger system. So I'm going to go ahead and just do an erase, and then I'm going to type in the word all and then hit enter twice. That'll just clear my whole screen up, okay? And I'm going to go back to the home tab. So what I'm going to look at here is this first document called the schematic. So let me explain what we're going to do here. And then, like I said, hopefully you can work this through with me. And then once we get some line work in here, then we're going to start to do some labeling, which is probably the big thing I want to show you today the most. So we're going to start at this point up here, and we're going to generate line by coordinate, line by coordinate, line by northing and easting coordinate, and line by northing and easting coordinate. So what that's going to do is that'll define bearing and distance, bearing and distance, bearing and distance. So very often, as you're working, you know, somebody's going to provide those coordinates for you. So you have the ability to type those in and use them. Now notice also where my north is, yours is going to be pointing up 90 degrees because on the screen, that's the way yours is going to look rotated. So that's not going to be incorrect. It's just the way I've rotated this on this picture. And then we're going to pick up and do a line by bearing for here. Then we're going to do a line by azimuth, and then we're going to do another line by bearing. And what we're going to see is this is not going to be perfect down here. So I'm going to try to get you to start thinking about how we can take numbers, and we have to kind of massage them sometimes to make sure they're working or not working. Okay, so if you have this available, that's what we're going to be utilizing. Okay, so I'm starting on that corner and working it around. So I'm going to go back to civil. And keep in mind, our line is going to be going up from the bottom of the screen to the top. So the first thing I'm going to do is key here. We're going to go line by northing and easting. Okay. So the first thing it's asking me is my northing value. I'm going to type in what I have, 2640.5836. Now, the reason I've given you such high values is because you do very often work in 4 decimal places. So once you have that, you just hit enter, and see, then it should be prompting you for the easting, 1041.5794. Now, you may not see anything because your line's probably way up there, so go ahead, don't worry about that. It should be prompting for you for the next northing. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 3183.3395 and 1070.0916. Okay, there's my line. I can finally find it. If you don't see it yet, what you might want to do is just hit the escape key twice and then do a zoom extents. You should find your line. So your line should be running like that. Is everybody finding that to be good? All right, everybody okay? All right, so we're going to go to the next line. So what I'm going to do is start this line by northing and easting. The first thing I'm going to do is snap to that line. So I'm going to use a nose snap and snap to that line. Oops, it's not going to let me. I guess I'm going to have to type that in. All right, so I'm going to go back to northing and easting. I'm going to have to type those values in. So the value that we just typed in, it'll be the northing. Actually, if it pops up the northing that you just typed in before, just go ahead and accept it. And the easting the same way. Okay, so I'm going to enter a new northing of 3227.5827 and an easting of 1253.9578. Okay, so it should be drawing that from that point to that. We're going to go, the last point we're going to enter is the far northern point. So we should have 3607.1318, 1315.4639. Okay, so your lines should look like that. Go ahead and hit enter and enter again, or escape actually. Escape is probably your best bet. So those lines actually have bearing and distance on them. And right now, we don't see that, but we're going to label these, and we could list them. If we went to analyze, we can see what those values are. Is everybody okay with that now? So keep in mind, our picture is 90 degrees, so north is up from this picture right now. So the next line we're going to establish is that line across the top. It's at south 8150.57 east. We have a distance given there. So we are going to go into create line by bearing. Now this time I should be able to use an O snap. Okay, so if you might want to go ahead and toggle on an endpoint O snap. That way you don't have to do anything. You can always do a shift right click, but make sure you get that O snap symbol that pops up when you see that left click, and you'll see your little tool here. So we are going to be in a southwest, or excuse me, southeast direction. So that's a quadrant 2. So you can either type in quadrant 2, or you can just come down in the southwest and click it anywhere you want. That tells it what quadrant you want to be in. So now it needs to know the bearing angle. So that's going to be 81.5057. So notice I'm entering that as if it's a decimal degree, but AutoCAD or Civil 3D knows that I'm talking about that being a degree minute second. So I'm going to go ahead and enter that. And then the distance that I've given you is 311.99. Okay, we're going to go ahead and hit enter. And that takes us to that point. So I'm going to now hit the escape twice. All right, how we doing? Is everybody okay? Any questions? And so the next line that we're going to establish is that east line of the boundary, and that has an azimuth given of 185.56.44. So the downside to that, it really doesn't tell you that's an azimuth, but it certainly couldn't be a bearing because it doesn't have a quadrant, and it doesn't have a, well, it exceeds 90 degrees. So we're going to go into line and create a line by azimuth. Snap the endpoint of that line. There's your azimuth indicator. We just type in the number 185.5644. And then the distance that's given on this plat is 952.87. Going to go ahead and hit enter. And then you're going to go ahead and hit the escape key. So what I'm going to show you is that if you're coming around a boundary that someone else has created and given all this information, everything isn't going to be a perfect fit because you're dealing with precisions. And so depending on how I draw this closing line, it may not fit to the east, or it may not fit to the west. So I'm going to choose to start from the western point. That's the point over here, and I'm going to establish it this direction. And I'm going to use the given bearing that's given to me. So it shows me 88.59.34 northwest. So I'm actually going to be traveling southeast. So I'm going to flip that. So I'm going to do a bearing creation by create line by bearing. I'm going to snap to this point, and I'm going to tell it southwest. And I'm going to enter the angle 86. 59.34, and then the distance that's given is 484.69. Going to go ahead and enter that. It looks like it closed. I'm going to go ahead and do a zoom extents. I'm sorry, escape. Hit the escape key twice, and then what you want to do is look up here, and you may have to zoom up pretty tight, and you'll notice those guys are not closing. And we probably all realize there's a reason for that. The reason being that you're dealing with precisions. And like I said, depending on whether you went this thing all the way around clockwise or counterclockwise, you would have different points of non-closure. So we're going to fix this because this is a really small, minute thing, but I don't want it hanging out there. So you do have to recognize by trimming these, we're going to change the distance, but it's so minuscule. What I'm doing is I'm holding the direction and squirreling, messing around with the distance a little bit. So you could use a trim. I like fillet. Fillet's a really nice thing to use. I just type in F for fillet, set your radius equal to 0, and then you just select the two lines, that line and that line, and that'll trim it up. Okay, we can go out and look back at our picture now. And if we would do an analyze on these lines, we'll see we probably didn't change anything to 2 decimal places at all. So if I list this line, you'll notice that that line is 484.69, which is what's given on the plat. And the bearing was held, so that didn't change. And right there, we've got that. And that distance was 952.87, and that's what the plat says. So we're in pretty good shape. You ever have a survey that comes together that good for you, you got a good thing. Okay, any questions on that? Is everybody okay so far? Okay, so we're going to run the center line through this thing. Okay, so this represents the center line of a road. And what I'm going to do then is start on the south end and work a curve in. And then we're going to do the same thing coming north. So we're going to do some intersections. So I'm going to show you some ways of handling different things. So I'm going to generate a line coming off of this. Now, if you look at those bearings, you've got the bearing here and the bearing of the roadway. If you add those together, you'll see that that's a 90-degree kind of thing. So you've got a lot, especially with subdivisions, a lot of times lines are going to be either parallel to something, or they're going to be perpendicular to something, or they're going to be radial to something if you have a curve. So we're going to kind of use those principles today just to show you kind of how this works. So I'm going to go back to line here, and I'm going to use this line tool, which is create line perpendicular from a point. So I'm going to generate this line right here. And the perpendicular point is right in the middle. If you notice the distance, it's 242.34 in both directions. So I'm going to shift, right click, grab the midpoint snap, and I'm going to snap it right there. And then it just wants to know the distance. And if you notice on that plat, we're going to generate that at 350. So just type in 350 and hit enter, and there's your line. Okay. Any questions on that? We're going to do the same thing from the north. We have a line up here, and we're going to bisect this line, and we're going to run it in perpendicular as well. So we're also going to then do a create line perpendicular from point. I'm going to use this line. I'm going to shift right click, grab the midpoint. Now I really don't care about this distance, even though they show you a distance there. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to drag this line out and see what we get. So there's my line. So I'm going to now do a curve. So I'm going to generate a curve from the end point of this line. We're going to run it this way. So we have a delta of 30 degrees that is given, a length of 104 something, but the radius is 200. Now if you notice, the distances that are really pure there is the angle is 30 degrees explicit and the radius is 200. So I would probably rather use one of those as opposed to, like, say, that length. That 104.72 is probably rounded. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and say curve from end of object. We're going to create this guy right here, and it wants to know my radius or my point. I'm going to choose radius. We're going to tell it 200. And we're now going to tell it delta. And the delta is 30 degrees. And it should send my arc like that. Okay? Is that working for everybody? Anybody questions?
What command again?
Okay, let me back it up then. All right, I'm going to undo what I just did, all right? All right, so Micah, what I did was I went to the curve routines, and I'm going to do this curve from end of object. Curve from end of object. Select your object, tell it the radius, 200. We're going to choose the delta option, which is 30, and that should do it. Okay, let me know if that worked. Anybody else? This is all pretty important stuff. What we're doing is really now tapping in. I mean, we're using AutoCAD, but what we're doing is we're utilizing it the way that an engineer or a surveyor would be talking to this. Did that work now?
Yep.
Okay, anybody else questions? Is everybody doing okay? All right, I'm assuming we are. Okay, so we're going to attach a line tangent to this guy right now. We're just going to shoot him out. We're going to then let these guys intersect. So I'm going to go into line. I'm going to create it tangent from a point. Actually, I could just do line for end of object. So I could use either or. I'm going to use this guy. And then I'm just going to show it the distance. Don't worry about the distance. Okay, that automatically made that line tangent. Okay, and so what I have is an intersection up here, or even if I don't have an intersection, it doesn't matter, because what we're going to do is we're going to create a curve here between these two, and it'll trim up everything. Is everybody okay with that so far? We're good? Okay, so we're going to generate a curve between two lines. This is just the fillet command essentially. So I'm going to pick this guy, and I'm going to pick this guy, and it's going to want to know, well, what do you want to use to define it with? Well, radius is what we're going to use. And this curve also has a 200-foot radius. So there's our line work, all right? And everything should be in here. And just to check this line right here, if we go to Analyze, select that line, we'll notice that my plat shows that as 244.60, and my distance is 344.60. So what's happening is there's an actual 100 feet difference, and the reason being is I'm going to have a cul-de-sac at the end of that 100 feet out. So basically, I'm good. Okay. If you check your arc, select your arc, you'll notice that the information that is given on that plat, the arc length 86.77, the radius is 200, the delta angle is 24.51.23. All of that is matching. So we're doing what we need to do. All right, any questions on that? Okay, is this going okay for everybody? Okay.
What was the analyze? What button did you click under the analyze to get that data?
Okay, under Analyze, there's two options that you'd be using a lot, Dave. This one right here is the one I'm using. It's called the Line and Arc Information tool. Okay. The other one right next to it is this guy for measuring angles. So that's kind of neat as well. But what I did is I just used this guy right there, the Line and Arc Information tool. So when you click on that, you just click on like your line, it gives you your bearing and distance. When you click on your arc, it gives you your tangent, chord bearing, length of arc, radius, and delta. So it gives you a whole lot of information. That's a real good question. Anybody else questions? Okay. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to jump over to this plat here. Okay, so we're going to start to flesh this thing out, and then we're going to do a little labeling on this stuff. So what we've defined is the exterior boundary of this thing. And so what we're going to start to do is work this right away in. Now, I don't have that information on here for you, but I'm going to show you some things. The right of way itself is 50 feet. So from that side to that side is 50 feet. So what we've defined is the center line of this thing. So that's an easy thing to deal with. This ball is a typical, this is a Hamilton County cul-de-sac. So I'm going to show you some things about this. Number one is this is a 40-foot radius. And notice it's 100 feet out from the end of that curve. So we're going to have to pinpoint where that is. And then the distance from where I call this the throat, where that thing starts to where that thing is tangent, that's 75 feet back. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways to do that. So we're going to define this cul-de-sac first, and we're going to start busting this up into lots, okay? And I want you to notice all of these guys are going to be parallel. So we're just going to be like offsetting 110, offsetting 110, offsetting 110. When we get into here, these lines are very often defined as radial lines. So when I'm in my curve, what I'm going to do is just snap this guy radial into that curve. When I'm on my tangent here, these guys are going to be perpendicular. On a cul-de-sac, most of these lines are radial. So what that means is they're running into the center of the ball. So this is coming in, and that's coming in like that. Okay, so I'm going to show you some things we can do to pinpoint these guys. All right, so let's go back to Civil 3D. So I want to know where 100 feet is along this line. There's a couple of ways I could do this. One would be to create a line that's exactly 100 feet here. So they have a tool here that is, let's see, trying to find it here. Create line by extension. Yeah. Well, one way is to do what's called a lengthen. And I think they have that in there. Yeah, I'm not seeing it. So what we could do is this. We could lengthen this to be a total value, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the AutoCAD lengthen command. If you just type in LEN for lengthen and hit enter, it'll give you some options. So this is a normal AutoCAD command. If you've never used this, this is pretty cool. What I'm going to do is use what's called the total option. And we're going to take that and say, we want this to be exactly 100 feet. So notice what you want to do is you need to click it. Let's see. I need to choose total first. Sorry. Let me back out of there. I did that wrong. I'm so used to using other routines. So just go ahead and hit the escape key. Go ahead and do lengthen and choose total. Then it'll come back and say that. So then I want to type in 100. Okay. So notice now when you select the line, I don't want it to be lengthened that way. I want it to be lengthened that way. Okay. So when I click it, what it actually did, it didn't lengthen it, it trimmed it. Did everybody get that to work? If I need to run through that again, let me know. Are we okay? All right. So I'm going to just now generate a circle, and I'm going to do a circle and a radius. So I'm just going to type in C for circle, select the endpoint of that 100-foot line, and when it asks me the radius, just type in 40. So that's going to be the cul-de-sac itself, okay? And we're going to offset these guys 25 feet. Okay, so I'm going to go into the offset command, just type in O for offset, specify a distance of 25 feet, and just select the object, show it the side, select the object, show it the side. Just do that for each one of these little objects here. Oop, I forgot to do the last one. How's that going for everybody? Is that good? Is everybody okay?
Now, is that geometry, when you do that offset, is it going to automatically connect them like those those arc lengths?
It will, because
Okay.
the way we drew them, that it works perfectly. Now, if you have lines that are not tangent to your curves, you may have some weird irregularities going on, okay? So that's a really good question there. But in general, if you've drawn it correctly with tangent curves, and you shouldn't have an issue. The other thing you could do to simplify that work a little bit is if you turn this guy into a polyline. So you can join these objects as a polyline, and then you can just do one offset to the left and one offset to the right. That's maybe a little bit easier to do it instead of all those picks and clicks that I did. Okay.
Wait, is that just a join command?
It is. So you would just type in J, hit enter, and select all those objects and join them. Now, if they don't join, again, that's just an AutoCAD thing, but that means they're not hitting endpoint to endpoint. Or either they're overlapping or they're not touching endpoint to endpoint. So that would probably also tell you if you haven't constructed everything correctly. Okay. Anybody else questions? Are we all keeping up? Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw a construction line across this. If I snap a line from the endpoint of that to the endpoint of that, it will be perpendicular to these guys. So I'm just going to do a normal line, create a line from that endpoint to that endpoint. And the reason I'm doing that, I'm going to use that as a reference. So if you have a cul-de-sac detail, the detail is that the throat starts 75 feet back this way. So I'm just going to do another offset. And my offset distance is going to be 75 feet. I'm going to select this line and then come back 75 feet. So you'll have, if you're working in any municipality, every cul-de-sac for wherever you go is different. This was the standard cul-de-sac that they used to use in Hamilton County. I'm not even sure they still do, but it probably is done correctly that way. All right, is everybody okay with that? All right, so we're now going to snap a line from the end point of this line to the tangent point on that line. And then we'll do a couple of trims, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm just going to use a normal line command, snap to the end point of that, and then do a shift right click, grab tangent, come up here and touch that arc, and then hit enter. There's the one side. Do the same thing on the other side. Endpoint to tangent. And there's my cul-de-sac. So we're going to start to do a couple of trims. I'm going to get rid of this line. I'm going to get rid of that line. I don't need those. I'm going to go into the trim command, just type in TR and hit enter. When it asks you to select objects, just hit enter again, and then just touch what you want to trim. Get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that. And then you can erase that, that, and that. And there's my roadway, my cul-de-sac. We're good to go to start developing lots out of this thing. And we're almost ready to do some labeling, so we'll kind of see how that works now. Any questions? No questions? Everybody doing all right? Is this working okay this way? I've tried to think a lot about how we could make this lecture good. So I'm hoping that this is working for everybody. Are we okay on that? All right. Well, let's go then back here a minute. And I would like you to look at this. And what we're going to see is, again, this isn't a course in designing subdivisions, but it is a course in trying to understand a little bit when you have tools, what you're using and why. A lot of times designers hold these lines perpendicular to your center line. Okay, so these guys are going to be all perpendicular. And since it was perpendicular to the center line itself coming in, notice these all have the same bearing. I wish that guy wouldn't pop up. So notice they're all 86, 86, 86, 86, the same bearing. So those lot widths are also 110. So an easy way to do this is we're just going to offset. We're going to offset this southern line 110 and 110 and 110. Do a few trims, and we'll be good to go. Okay. So I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to offset this line 110, and I'm just going to do that straight up. So I'm going to go into the offset command in AutoCAD. And I want you to understand, I'm using a lot of AutoCAD as much as Civil 3D, and that will be true as you get into other aspects of Civil 3D, because it's just not all using their tools. So we're going to go ahead 110 as our distance. We're going to just go ahead and select that line, and then select that line, and then select that line. Okay. Now, we might find that these guys are not hitting on that side or this side. I believe they should hit on this side because this is a 90-degree angle between this and this. Okay, but you notice that they're not here. So we're going to have to do an extend and a trim. So I'm going to show you a little trick here. If you've never used this, this is a really cool little tool. So what we're going to do is trim them out of the middle here. So I'm going to type in TR for trim, hit enter. When it asks you to select objects, just hit enter again. So you can come up here, select that. Oops, I don't know, mine didn't execute right. Try that again. TR, enter, and enter. Okay, so I should be able to trim that, trim that, trim that. Now I also want to extend these. So you just hold the shift key down, hit the end of the line, hold the shift key down, hit the end of the line, hold the shift key down, hit the end. So when you're in a trim, if you hold the shift, it puts you in extend and vice versa. Okay, once you're done with that, you can go ahead and hit the escape key. So we've just built those lots really quick like. Any questions? All right, so let's go back here and look at this. So now this line is coming from that endpoint and it's running radial. Now again, you don't necessarily know that, but I'm showing you because I designed it this way. So, you know, that obviously gives that one lot a real big lot. That's not necessarily the way you'd normally do it. But again, for the ease of what we're doing here, we're just gonna run it that way. So we're gonna snap a line from that endpoint down to the center of this curve, and then we'll trim it off. And that line is then considered to be what we call radial, which means it's running through the curve center point, okay? So I'm gonna go back to my Civil 3D. I'm gonna use a line here, just a normal line. I'm gonna snap it to the end point of that, and then I'm gonna use a shift right click and snap it to the center of any of those arcs should do, because they're all the same. So I'm just gonna click one arc, and notice that line is now what we call a radial line, okay? It's a radial line, so I'm gonna now trim that off, TR. I am gonna select this as my trim boundary, and then hit enter, and then select that. And that way that takes care of that. Okay.
When you did the snap to the radial with that line,
Yep.
was the end point of it out there in space? Would that have been like the radius point of your curve?
That is the radius. Let me back it up, Dave. Okay, let me show you. It's definitely the end point of the arc. So watch what happens here now. So I went to the line command and I snapped to the end point, right? And then I want to go to the center of that circle. So I'm going to do a shift, right click, center. Notice the little green O snap that's popping down there. You see that?
Yep.
That circle tells you that's a center point.
Okay.
And I could do that. Does anybody know another way I could do the same thing?
Wasn't there an option for a perpendicular?
Yeah, and you could snap it perpendicular. So if I would go this way, create a line from the end point to the perpendicular on that object. When you're perpendicular to a curve, you're radial. So that keeps me from having to trim it. But if you want to see what that's actually doing, I wanted you to see that it actually went to the center of the circle. So if I extended this guy, it would go right to the dead center of that circle. Or arc, I guess I should say. It's not a circle. Okay, anybody else questions? Okay, so We're going to do the same thing up here on this corner, but let's look at this. This actually, because we're on a tangent now, we want to be 90 degrees here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to snap another line from that corner right there, and I'm going to snap it perpendicular to that tangent. So I'm just going to use another simple AutoCAD snap. So I'm going to come into the line command, snap to the endpoint, and what I'm going to do is do a perpendicular snap to the tangent, and there's my line. Okay. Now this line runs all the way across into this guy. So what I'm going to do is extend it and trim it basically all in one shot. Okay. So what I'm going to do is go into the extend command, just type in EX and hit enter. When it asks me to select objects, I'm just going to hit enter again. So I'm going to select it and then select it and then select it. And then I'm going to hit the shift key and trim and trim. Okay. So that allowed me to extend it and trim it at the same time, essentially. Everybody okay with that?
So when you're in the trim command, when you hit the shift key, it does the opposite.
Yeah, and when you say you hit it, you have to hold it down. Okay.
Right.
You can't just hit it, because if you just hit it, you're back. Yeah, so if you're in a trim mode and you hit shift, you're now extend and vice versa. So if you're not used to that little thing, again, that's not a Civil 3D thing, that's an AutoCAD thing. But hopefully you're seeing we're utilizing combinations of both things, and that's the really cool aspect of this.
Yeah, that and that lengthen tool that you used, those were good.
Yeah, and that's AutoCAD, really. Okay. Now, some of the same tools are built into the Civil 3D thing. So, all right, how we doing? We're almost done. And we're going to start the labeling process, and labeling gets pretty neat. So, okay, so let's go to this picture. Notice what I'm doing here from the angle point of where that cul-de-sac starts. We're going to run a perpendicular line to the east and to the west. Okay. So I'm going to use a Civil 3D tool to do this. So I'm going to go back here, and I want it to be perpendicular to this guy right here. So what I'm going to do is generate a line perpendicular from point. So I'm going to choose this guy as my thing, and then there's my point. And I'm going to just drag this out any distance, because I'm going to trim that off. I want to make sure it hits. And I'm going to do the same thing in the other direction. I'm going to go create a line perpendicular from a point. There's the object I want to be perpendicular to. There's the point I want to be perpendicular from. Bring it out, and there we go. I just do that so that I know that I'm overkilling it, and then I can always trim. So what I'm going to now do is trim it. TR, enter twice. Trim that side. Trim that side, and there's my lines. Okay. All right, so we're in pretty good shape. So we've got 4 more lines to develop, or 3 more lines to develop, and that'll give us create the end of those lines that we're dealing with.
Why do you have to hit enter twice when you're doing that trim command?
Okay, let me get into it real quick. If you hit enter, trim, enter once, it says to select objects to make boundaries from. By hitting enter again, what you've done is you've made everything a boundary. So you can selectively make a boundary, or you can make everything a boundary. So it's just a difference, that's all.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. All right, so let's go back and look at this picture. Who can tell me how we're going to finish this cul-de-sac out? What information do we know? We have bearings and distances, right? So any suggestion, like how we're going to do this western line here? What would be a good way of doing that?
Just offset, then go from there.
Offset what?
The 169.66.
169, let's see, I'm trying to find where that is. Oh, what would you offset exactly?
From the line we just did.
Oh, this guy.
Yeah.
Okay, and then that would give you a line out here, right?
Yeah, and then you can go from there.
The problem is that this line, see that bearing right there, that 9, 12, 17 versus the 8, 0, 9, see that? They're not parallel. So when you offset this line, you may have to also extend it or something. I mean, that could work. I'm not disagreeing with you. But the problem is that 169.66 is not perpendicularly measured, okay? So that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
All right. You would be close, but you would be off a little bit.
Yeah.
So as I look at this, a better way, when I see this as a just because I'm experienced in doing this, I know that most designers run these lines through the ball, they're radial lines. So what I would say is let's establish that line from the center of the cul-de-sac using the bearing. And I'm not even going to worry about the distance. I'm just going to overkill it, and then I'll trim it. Okay? So that wasn't a bad suggestion, except because those lines aren't parallel, you weren't getting the exact distance you thought you were. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go back here. So we have a bearing that's shooting out here, and if you've got your sheet, it's 510305 southeast, so that would be the same thing as northwest. So what I'm going to do is grab this line and create it by bearing, snap it to the end point of that, show it that it's a northwest, and then we need to type in the value, which is 51.0305. So remember, I don't care about that distance. I'm just going to overkill it. So I'm just going to drag it past, and then I'm going to take it and hit enter twice. Okay. And we'll trim that up here in a minute. So we're going to do this line. Remember, that came from the midpoint. So I'm going to just say line from the center to the midpoint. That one's exactly where it needs to be. And then the other line is going the other direction. We've got a 632246 northeast bearing. So I'm going to do another line by bearing, snap to the center of the ball, show it the quadrant, and then show it the angle, 63.2246. And drag this out, and then hit enter twice. Okay. So again, I'm showing you just maybe one way of doing things. There's a lot of different ways you can get into doing stuff. Just remember, doing that offset wouldn't have worked in that case. Okay, so that's kind of important to understand. All right, everybody okay? All right, so we're going to go ahead and do some trims. So I'm going to go ahead and trim, and I'm going to hit enter again because I want to make everything a trim boundary. And I'm going to trim that, and I'm going to trim that, and I'm going to trim the inside so that I get those out of the cul-de-sac. There we go. There's our survey. Now we're just about ready to label. We got one more thing to do. If you notice down at the bottom, we have curves in here. Those are going to vary depending, again, by code. I forget what I put those in. I think they're 20 feet. Yeah, I think they're 20 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and put them in at 20 feet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim between these two lines right here, and then we're going to fillet those with a 20-foot radius. So I'm going to go into the trim command. Going to select that side and that side as my trim boundary, and then hit enter, and then just trim it between. Okay, so now I can fillet this side and I can fillet this side. So I'm going to go ahead and do a fillet, F, enter, R, enter, 20 feet, select that side, and then do the same thing on the other side. And and you should be good to go now.
Now, could you do that with Civil 3D command curve? What would that be? Curve between two lines?
Yeah, it's exactly the same command. It's just
Okay.
it has more variables built into it. Fill it only gives you the radius option, which is all I needed. But you know, the other Civil 3D, like I said, it's probably on steroids. It's got like way more than you're using. So keep it simple, okay? When you're using stuff, utilize what works, okay? And yeah, definitely you could use the Civil 3D thing, okay?
So fillet is basically, I mean, you need two components for your curve, right? So,
Well, fillet basically, yeah, you need a minimum of two things, and really you need three. But if you have two lines there, that's your delta angle between them. So it already knows that. And then the radius, it swings in and it assumes you're doing a tangent kind of thing. Okay. Yeah, you can get by with two on a curve, but usually you want more information than that typically. Okay. You guys good now? Now we're going to start to do some labeling. So this is where it's going to really take us into some Civil 3D stuff. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. Is everybody good at this point? What I might suggest you do is save your drawing at this point, because if this crashes in the middle of doing something, then you're going to not have anything to look back at. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a real quick save as. You can call it anything you want, put it like on your desktop or wherever you can find it conveniently. So I would just save it. I'm going to just put it out on my desktop, save it, and then I'm good to go. Okay. Good idea when anytime you're working, but particularly Civil 3D will crash occasionally. So you got that. All right. So let's look back at this picture a minute. And I want you to notice there's several labels here. We are labeling with bearings. Okay. And so you notice this top line here, that east line, or that's the west line, excuse me, that has a bearing and a distance associated with it. And that routine is called your bearing and distance. Below, we're using distance only. This one is called bearing over distance, okay? So we're looking at three different labelings there, and they all have different styles associated with them. Bearing and distance, distance only, bearing over distance. Then we also have these little guys, L1, L2. Those are called line tags. And I'm going to show you how to create those because I can't always fit a bearing in or a distance in. So what I can do is create what's called a table. And so those tags are going to be associated with tables. And then on curves, you'll notice you have curve labeling. If we go back to the schematic, you'll notice I labeled that with the length of arc, the radius, and the delta angle. And I can also do it with just like the radius or the delta or length. I could do it a lot of different ways. If I go back to my final, instead of actually putting all that information, you'll see a little C1, C2, C3. Those are called curve tags, and those are going to be associated with a curve table. So we're going to generate lines first, then we're going to come back and generate a line table, and then we're going to do some curves, and we're going to do a curve table. And that should show you how to do all this today. So, and in fact, on our the lab that we're going to be working on in this project, it's going to be very similar to what I just ran you through. So you're going to be piecing it all together yourself. That'll be the difference. Okay. So when we do these, what we're doing is what's called an annotation. So we go to the annotate tab. Okay. And you'll notice over here, you got text and dimensions, and those are things you should be used to seeing. But here we have Civil 3D ones over here. Add labels and add tables. Okay. So we're going to do the labels first, and we're going to do the labels. We're going to add some other things secondarily. Okay. So we're going to open this guy right here, and notice there's all these different things you can label: surfaces, figures, parcels, feature lines, alignments. Those are Civil 3D objects. Okay. Catchments, pipe networks, pressure networks. We don't have any of those things yet. But we do have lines and curves. So down here, notice we've got lines and curves, and you have add line and curve labels, add single segment, add multiple, and add between two points. So we're going to go to this guy right here, which gives you kind of the most flexibility. This pops this guy out. So what we have the feature. Okay, notice you've got different types of features you can grab right here. We're going to be at the curves and line and curve. We can do what's called a single segment, multiple, or between 2 points. So we're going to start out with single segment labeling. And under that, then you have for lines, you have all these different styles. So these are already pre-set up for you in Civil 3D. And we're going to utilize some of these, and then we're going to alter some of them as well. Now you can also, as a user, you can create anything you want and add these into your project file. So you can utilize these and have them. Now very often, I don't recommend updating things that's already created, but then you get a lot. So we're going to actually just edit these as we go. But once we make one edit change, it'll work forever for us, which is kind of cool. So remember I said we have bearing and distance, bearing over distance, and then distance only. Those are the three that I used in this. So we're going to start out with what's called a bearing and a distance. So what we're then going to do is come down here, make sure it says bearing and distance, come over here, and we're going to do what's called an add this guy. So all you have to do is just click on the line anywhere, and you should see a label that came in. Now it doesn't look perfect. You'll notice there's this little goofy arrow in here, and it's 2 decimal places, and it's got 3 decimal places for distance. So we're going to fix that, but I want to come up here, and I want to do this line, and I want to do this line, and I want to do this line same way. Okay. All right. Questions? Pretty simple. If you go look at those. Go ahead.
When you do that, do you need to pick up towards the end of the line that you want the direction of the arrow to be going?
No, it doesn't really matter because, okay, if notice this guy right here, it may actually matter, but you can flip it. So I'm going to show you how to change some things up here. Okay. Did you get the 4 labels that I got down here, everybody? Okay, you can go ahead and close this box. So first off, these guys are what are called annotative labels. I want you to notice, what does your drawing scale factor say down here? Mine says 40. Is everybody's 40 or is it something different? These are going to affect, this is going to affect not your overall drawing, but this will affect labeling. So notice if I go from a 40 to 100 scale, how those get bigger, and how they would get smaller if I go the other direction. Okay, so that can impact that, and especially when you get into paper space, we're going to see how that all works. So let's go ahead, we'll just set it to a 50 right now. But remember, they're just going to change, okay? All right, so also notice, they're not right in the middle of the line, mine aren't, but I want those guys to be right in the middle. So what we're going to do is come down here to our O snaps. I'm going to turn endpoint off, and I'm going to turn midpoint on. So just make only running O snap that you have there is midpoint, okay? Make sure your O snap is on. Come up to a label and click on it, and you're going to get 2 grips. The diamond grip, if you click on that, allows you to move that thing along the line anywhere you want. So notice, if I come down to the midpoint snaps out, and then I can just take him right to the midpoint. The square grip is a way to move this guy off of the line, so you can do it like that. That gives you that. So you have 2 grips always associated with these. The diamond grip, which is a movement, and then you have the square grip, which is a placement. And then this guy allows you to add extra kinks into your multi-leader, okay, which I don't recommend, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and undo what I just did, bring it back, but make sure you're going to get that guy into a midpoint location, because that's the way you really want them. So they don't come in midpoint automatically. So I'm going to go with this one, click on that guy, do the midpoint grip. I'm going to do this guy to his midpoint, Whoops. And I'm going to take this guy to his midpoint. Did anybody's bearing occur on the inside instead of the outside? Did everybody's bearing look like mine? They're on the outside of the lines, not on the inside of the lines? Anybody having that issue? Okay. All right, so now we're going to edit this style because this style is not what we want to see. All right, this style is not very good. So what we're going to do, it doesn't matter which of these labels you click on because they're all governed by the same style. So you're just going to click on one of them and then you're going to right click. Now there's some pretty cool things here. Notice label properties, edit label style, flip label. So if it's on the wrong side of the line, you can flip it. So if notice if I flip it, he's now inside. If I don't want him there, I flip him outside. The other thing that's there is a reverse label. So notice mine's going north, now it's going southwest. So it was northeast, southwest. So you can reverse those really easily on those, okay? Everybody okay with that? Those are very cool tools. So you got your grip tools, and you got your flip tool, and you got your reverse direction tool. All right? Questions? All right, so we're going to edit the style now. Okay, now this gets a little tricky. So just make sure you follow with me, and if you're not following some aspect, let me know, okay? So we're going to click on a label, and we're going to right click, and we are going to edit the label style that is associated with this. So it will generate this box. So it is a bearing and distance style. So over here you have several options. You can create new, you can copy current, you can create a child, or you can edit the current selection. I'm just going to go ahead and edit the current selection. And it opens up this dialog box. So this is your composer, and a lot of your labels are going to look very similar to this, but some of them are going to be different. So we'll step through them. You have what's called a general information tab, not too much information in there. Usually who created it and how it's created. You can also descriptively add stuff. The general is typically dealing with what type of text style you're using, those kind of things, and behaviors. We'll talk about some of that a little bit more. The layout and the drag state are probably where most action occurs. So we're going to go to the layout first. Okay. So this label is composed of a couple of things. Notice right now the component name, it says direction arrow on mine. If I open up, and I also have a bearing, and I also have what's called a table tag. Okay, so there's three things that are actually associated with this. We are going to go to the direction arrow first. I almost never use a direction arrow, so I usually just get rid of these things. So the way to get rid of it, under the general property, there's a visibility guy there that says true. We're going to just click on here and we're going to make that false. And notice what you do over here in the image tile, it'll show up over here, which is pretty nice. Okay, did everybody get that to work? I would almost never, ever use an arrow, but I guess some people do. Okay, so now we're going to go to the bearing, which actually is composed of two things. It actually is a bearing and a distance. So even though it just says bearing, there's both. Okay, so notice you have bearing, its visibility is true, how it's anchored. But down in this area, this is where the important area is, text, and we have this thing called the general segment. Just click on that, and you get this little ellipsis that pops up. Click on that ellipsis. So this is the actual component right here of what you're looking at. And notice if I click on this guy right up here, it tells me that's your general segment direction. If I click on this guy, it tells me that's my general segment length. So what we're going to do is edit both of those because both of those are incorrect. So I want to click on the general segment direction. and it shows me that the unit is degrees, the format is DMS, it's a bearing type measurement, and the precision, that's the thing I want to change. It says that it's a hundredth of a second. Click on that, open it up. We want to go to 1 second. Okay, we want to make 1 second. Now, here's where people make the mistake. They think, oh, I made the change and I'm good to go. But you're not good to go until you promote this change. So you notice there's this little arrow here. You have to click on that. You might notice that that changed. What that did, does that actually change that up? Okay, is everybody following me? This is the hardest part about labels. And once you do this a couple of times, then it really starts to make sense. Okay.
That was under text contents that you got there.
It was under, well, let me back out because I went, yes, under text. Yes, correct. I didn't know what it was called. Yeah, so I clicked on that ellipsis to take me to that. Correct. Okay. So I went to that piece. It says a tenth of a second. I want to go to 1 second and then I promote it. Okay. Is that good? All right. So I'm going to go down here to the general segment length, and that is also set to 3 decimal place precision. I don't want that to be 3 decimal place precision. I want that to be 2. So select 2 on the precision, promote it, hit OK, apply it, and OK it. And you can actually just OK out of here, and you'll notice that all of your labels that are governed by that style are now fixed, and we don't have to mess with them. So anytime that we do that style, they're going to see exactly, or we're going to see exactly what we want. Okay, is that working for everybody? Now these labels, like dimensions, are annotative, so, or associative, excuse me. So what that means is that they are linked to the lines. So as the lines move, the labels will too. Watch, you guys don't need to do this, but watch, I'm gonna grip these lines and move the lines out. Notice the labels updated and moved with them, okay? So that's also a pretty neat feature. They will actually update and move with it. So I'm gonna bring that back. If you delete a line that they're associated with, they will also be gone. So if I delete this line, the label goes with it. So they are associated, okay? Does everybody see that? Also, if we click on this, we can right click and go to properties, label properties. This will show us things like what the color is, what the line, the label layer is, those kind of things. So we can add some, we can change some things up. What I want to do, notice these labels are on a layer called C-Anno. Okay, so C is for civil, Anno is standing for annotation. Well, you can put them on all kinds of different values, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to change the color of that C-Anno layer. I don't know if that will let me do it in here. Yeah, I can. So I'm going to go to the C-Anno layer. Yep, I'm going to do it in the layer properties. It's a lot simpler. So I'm just going to go into, I'm going to go into this drop down, which has a gazillion layers, but find the C-Anno and just click on that color. Let's just make that red so these guys show up. And then you can see now they're all going to be red from now on. Okay, is everybody okay with that? Okay, let's try doing some distance labeling. Okay, so we're going to go over to the annotation tab. We're going to add some labels, lines and curves. We're going to use the add line and curve labels. So this time we're going to use a single segment, and I probably should, before I go any further, let's do this. Open up your O-snaps. Get rid of midpoint. We're going to set it to endpoint because we're going to be utilizing endpoint O-snaps on this. Okay. All right. So instead of doing a single segment, what I'm going to be doing is between 2 points. So I could break up all these lines, but there's no real point to do that if I can use by between two lines. So I'm going to do label type line between 2 points, and this time I'm going to use what's called distance only. I'm going to go ahead and add. I'm going to come down here, pick a point, pick a point. Notice it's flipping on the outside. That's okay. Mine's flipping on the outside. You guys can move those in later. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing across the front here. Okay, and there's my labels for right now. You can go ahead and close this box. Okay, so we should see 90, 110, 110, and then 110, 110, 110. So notice we need to change the label style, but we also need to flip these guys. So I'm going to come up here and select each one of those. I can flip them en masse, I believe. Let me see if I can do that. Be careful with this one so that you get the right one. And I'm going to flip these guys in. So I'm going to right click and flip them. They all flip down. And by the way, these actually do hit the midpoint between those 2 points, so you don't have to move them. But you can if you want to. How's everybody doing? We doing all right?
Do you have to hold the shift key down to flip those in mass or just select them individually?
You can select them individually because they stay selected. So notice if I just click and click, I'm just clicking, I'm not holding anything. So once they're all selected, then I right click, flip. Okay, so I can do it that way. Or you can do them one at a time if you want to be careful. It doesn't really matter. But get used to that because that's really a nice feature. And by the way, when you hit a label, I probably didn't say this, but when you hit a label, the context sensitive editing tab and the ribbon is showing up. You can do a lot of the same stuff up here. But if you learn to do the right clicks, everything's right at your fingertips. You don't have to like look up and pick another selection. It's already there. Okay, is everybody good on that? Is this coming out all right for everybody? Not getting a lot of questions, so I'm guessing we're doing okay. All right, so we need to edit this style. So notice this style is different from this one. So we're going to just click, it doesn't matter which one we click on. And then we're going to right click and we're going to go to edit the label style. So notice this says, yep, this is a distance only label style. I'm in an edit mode, so I don't have to open that box. I'm just going to click on that. All right. So what we have is it brought me right to the layout tab. And what I need to do is go to the general segment, click on that, and notice there's only one here. I just click on that guy, highlights everything I need. Precision. Precision is going to be 2 decimal places. Promote that, and okay it, apply it, okay it, and okay it. So notice it fixed all of mine. And so for the rest of the time I'm working here and here in this drawing, I'm going to be good to go. Is everybody okay with that? So we got some more label. I'm going to do some more labeling up here real quick, just to kind of fill. And we won't have to do all of this, but I want to get some of this in so you guys see now that once I've done this now. Again, I'm going to do between 2 points. Distance only, I'm going to add, pick that one, pick that one. Very convenient. These tools are really awesome. They work really well for the most part. Like I said, I may have to do some flipping, that's not a big deal. It certainly beats having to do this kind of labeling any other way. To do this in AutoCAD would be horrendous. Plus, the beauty is that this is really tied to your model now, in this case. Any questions? Okay, so we're going to do one more label style now. We're going to do the bearing over distance. So if this box is open, you can still use it. If not, just remember you can go to your Annotate tab, add your labels, lines and curves. We're going to generate this guy. Okay. So this time I'm going to do this based on segments. So instead of doing between 2 points, we're going to go to a single segment. I want to find what's called the bearing over distance. Okay. Now I could go in here and edit this right away, but sometimes I just like to add it first and then look at them later. So I'm going to go ahead and add. And again, this one, I just pick, 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 and all it does is it just generates my labels real nice for me. I think you guys get the idea. Now, what some people like to do on these is they'll say southeast, northwest, they kind of flip those back and forth. It really truly doesn't matter. But that's kind of how you'd have that. Now, let's look at this one. Normally, your distance should be on the inside, not the outside. I don't care about these, but this one I did definitely. I want to flip it. So I'm going to click on that guy, flip it. That's good to go. Now, the other thing is they don't come in the way you want them to. So a lot of times we're going to have to go to a midpoint O snap and move these guys. So I'm going to set my midpoint O snap. Take that guy, make sure it's midpoint. So they look pretty close. That bothers me. I wish they would just do that automatically, but they don't. The between 2 points definitely works that way. But the nice thing is you sometimes don't want them in the midpoint. Sometimes you want to move them around. So you have to, it really is just what you're utilizing and how you're doing it. But you can see each one of those is not quite midpoint. But that's why that grip is there. So it's really nice to be able to just move them around. So I'm just moving each one of those around where I want it. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So who can tell me what we need to do now?
Edit our style.
All right. So how are we going to do that? You guys lead me through.
Click on one of those dimensions.
All right.
Right click. Edit label style. Click on the edit icon.
Correct. So far, good.
Click on the contents general segment under the text.
Right.
Click the ellipsis.
Now this one has, let's see, that has a bearing. So there's going to be a bearing segment and a distance segment, I believe, on this one. So this is the general direction segment. So we want to change that to what?
1 second.
1 second. Remember, don't forget to promote that. That's the important thing there. And hit OK.
Click OK.
Yep.
Click Apply.
Yeah.
Click OK.
Now that only took care of what? One component, right?
Well, it should have taken care of all of the...
Well, the weird thing is that's kind of like base. There's two different ones there. Sometimes they're together and sometimes they're not. So notice I have to go back in there, hit the general segment, and what I got to find there is the general. In this case, it doesn't just show up for me. This one's a little strange. You have to find the general length segment. I get the wrong one. General length segment. That one's not working right. Hold on a minute. There should be 2 in there. It shows me. Now, why is that not working? Today. Let's see. This one should have the other component to it. Oh, okay. Here's my problem. Here, okay, here's what I did. This one, this is where it gets tricky. Sometimes those things are incorporated into the same thing, and sometimes they're not. So when I clicked on this, what I forgot to do, notice with the component name, there's tag, bearing, and distance. So I have to go to distance here. That's why it wasn't showing up. So general length segment. Now I can click on that and remove that back to that way. Promote it. I forget to promote it all the time, by the way, and you'll get out of there and you'll think, oh, you promoted it and it didn't do anything. So that fixed all of those. Are we doing okay, guys?
So for the bearing over distance, you have to do it twice.
Well, okay. No, here, let me show you. I had to, because I was messing something up. So for bearing over distance, you click on it, right? Right click and go to your edit label styles. All right, under the component name, there's 2 components here that you're after, the bearing, which came up first, and the distance. So you have to do it twice within the same thing, but you don't have to necessarily do it twice. You know, you don't have to necessarily get out of it and back into it. But there's 2 components associated with this, okay? That's the thing. Where it's weird the way they build them, because sometimes the components are linked together in the same box. But this one, there's actually 2 components. So when we did
the bearing and the distance, they were linked together.
Yeah, they were in one component. Okay. They just called it bearing, but it actually was bearing and distance. See? But this one is actually one or the other. And you can actually, do you notice there's visibility here? So you could actually even turn the distance visibility to false. So if I set this distance visibility to false and I apply this, what'll happen is it'll disappear on all my labels. So it's actually there, it's just not showing up. Okay. So you gotta kind of watch. That's why I said labels can be tricky. And as you just saw, I was kind of duped by that rule at first. So if I go back to my distance tag, my distance, set that visibility back to true, apply it, and okay it, yeah, I'm good to go. Okay. So there's differences in the way you can build, and that's why I said labeling is probably one of the harder things to do at times. Okay. Any questions? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and build a few more labels, and then I'm going to show you how to build a line table. Okay. So notice we've got a little distance here from the end point of that line to the beginning of the curve. That's a distance. And then there's a distance here from there to there. And then from that line to that. And I think that there's one here we can all, oh, there's another little label there. So we're going to go ahead and label these guys. And I'm going to use a distance label to do this. So I'm going to go back here. And then this time we're going to do what's called line between 2 points. I'm going to do a distance only. Oh, before I do that, let's go ahead and snap my O-snap back to endpoint. I'm going to toggle off mid, add it. So I'm going to come here, go to the end of that line to the end of that line, and notice that doesn't fit. That's okay, we're going to handle that. And I'm going to go from here to here, and that one doesn't fit. And that one doesn't fit. That one's a little bit big. And that one's pretty decent, okay? Okay, go ahead and close that. So you have a couple of ways you can handle this. One way would be to click on it, and well, see, he doesn't even have a grip you can pull out. So sometimes they don't have a grip. This was not going to let me pull it out. So that's not going to work. The only thing I can do with these grips is move them, or if I move that grip, it moves the whole bearing, or the distance rather. So that doesn't have the type of grip that would give me a multi-leader. So these are a problem right here. I've got that one, I've got that one, and I've got that one, and that one. So what we can do is build what's called a table. So this table will generate for me a, it'll give me a tag. So it calls it like L1, L2, L3, and it'll replace this number with the tag number. And then it'll also build for me the distance of that tag and the bearing of that tag. So it's kind of nice. Now this is very commonly used for labeling, these tables. The one thing about the tables, they're kind of tricky in paper space. The kind of trick with them is you have to set your drawing scale factor here to the scale factor you're going to use when you insert it in paper space. Otherwise, they really whack out. And they're a little tricky from that standpoint, but they're easy to do here. So what we're going to do here is add a table, and we're going to do what's called add a line curve table, add a line table. Okay, so you'll get this box, it'll pop up. There's all these different styles. What we're going to use is the one automatically that's popping up that's called length and direction. Okay. If you have more than, let's say, 20 little tags, it'll split a tag, it'll split the table. So you'll get 20 in the one and then 21 through whatever in the next one, and it automatically places it for you. We don't have that many, so I'm not going to worry about what that's set to. So what you do have to do is go out and select your labels that you want to create tags out of. So that's why this says no tags selected. We're going to go ahead and say pick on the screen. And what we're going to do is select the ones that we want to turn into tags. So we're going to select that one, that one, that one, that one. I think that was the only ones that we really needed to do that with. So then go ahead and hit enter. And it'll ask you, what do you want to do with these? Convert them to tag styles or don't add labels at all. So in other words, I'm going to go ahead and convert them. And then I can go ahead and hit OK. And it'll allow me to place my table I usually place my table off to the side. So what you'll notice first off, these have now been replaced with L1, L2, L3. These guys are, I think, a little bit friendlier. You can actually click, well, no, those aren't still working. So sometimes you can move those as well. But this guy, here's your parcel line table. Okay, so it built all that. It's really nice. What you might notice, though, is that we have the same issues with precisions that we have on the other types of labels. That doesn't have a foot mark, and that one's to 2 decimal places. So very easy to fix. All we're going to do is click on this guy. Sorry, click on the table. And then right click, and we're going to go to edit the table style. Edit the table style. So this pops up, and you've got parcel number, length, and direction. So what we're going to do is click on, double click that, and you'll notice the segment length is set to foot, and it's 2 decimal places, which is good, but it doesn't have a foot mark. So you're going to come click over here behind that little greater than symbol and just enter a foot mark from your keyboard, and then go ahead and hit OK. And we're going to double click the direction, and it opens up the label style that you're used to. Click on that guy. Make the seconds 1 second, promote it, okay it. You don't necessarily have to hit apply, but the beauty of apply is that it makes the change. So if you don't like the change, you can cancel. But if you're good with it, then you just hit okay. And there's your parcel table. So anytime now that you generate a length and you want to add a tag to it, by the way, you can add tags, you just got that all set. Another thing that will happen to you very often is, notice this did come in L1, L2, L3, L4, but sometimes they're scrambled up. So if you want to get them in order, you can sort them. If you double click on your table and right click to edit table styles, there's this little sort toggle right there. You just go ahead and hit that and apply that and okay it, and it'll sort it for you. So you might have a bunch of those, and you might have an L1 and an L2 and an L50 and then L41 and 42. So again, you can just sort them out. Okay, any questions on the tables? That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, you know, when you added that foot mark, what you were doing was behind your video feed. I wasn't able to see.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Sorry.
No.
Let me change that. So, can you see that now?
Yeah, I moved the video screen, but I didn't see it when you did it.
All right. So let me just do it real quick. Can you see everything now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going into edit the table style. So right there. Hold on a minute. That's what you're saying, Shop. Is that good now?
Yeah, when you added the foot mark, how did you add the foot mark? That's what
So
I missed.
you go to the length column and you double click down here.
Okay.
And it opens up this guy.
Yeah.
Notice there's your that's all your information.
Yeah, that's the part I couldn't see right there.
Behind that I put a little symbol.
Okay.
Okay, look, I'm going to take it out. I'm going to delete it. Okay. Then I'm going to okay that and apply it and close it. Notice I got rid of that little symbol.
Yep.
Okay, so if I just put that back in, you don't have to do that very often, but there's a couple of these tables in particular, they never have those in there for some reason. So I just came up here, put the foot mark, and then okay that. So you guys, if you were in industry working on this, what you do is you would create your own style and save it and make that part of the prototype so that you never have to keep doing this every time. But we're going to be doing this a lot, and it's primarily because you guys need to learn how to do it. So the more you do it, the more you're going to learn about it. Okay. Is that working? I'm not getting many questions from anybody else. Is everybody else doing okay? Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. So we're ready to do some curves now. So curves are no different. But there are some tricks with curves that I would suggest. One is to take your curves and you might want to break them up. Oh, you know what I just did there? Anybody see what I did there? That's a curve, isn't it? Okay, so we're gonna take that tag out because that's a curve. I'm gonna delete that. And I don't think I have to oh, see, notice when I did that with my table, it updated. Okay, so let's see. I've got a curve here, and I've got a curve. There's two curves here, actually. And there's a bunch of curves here. There's one here, and here, and here, and here. So we're going to break that up. First off, let me show you what you might see on a normal curve kind of thing. Let's go over here. And we are going to go to Lines, Curves, Add Line Curve Labels. So I'm going to do a single segment, but down here under the curve label style, notice they have distance, radius, delta, just distance, which would be, distance would be length of arc, over radius. You got all these different options. So let's say we went to a distance, radius, delta option. Go ahead and do an add. And I'm going to come to the center line curve here, label that, and label that. And then I'm going to go ahead and close that. So if you've got that to show up, the stuff, first of all, you can see it needs some editing. It's not a perfect world, but it also doesn't look very good because of the way it works. Now you do have grips on here. You can move this guy along that anywhere. Okay, but probably instead of labeling it like this, it's usually probably more advantageous to pull it out. So if I pull this out like this, I'll get an arrow leader and I can mess with some of that. again, notice this has the delta symbol in there, which is cool. But again, the precisions are all whacked out. They don't have foot marks. So that's not going to be something we want right off the bat. But that's one way of doing a curve. Now, on these little curves that we have going on here, we've got small little curves, and we don't really want to have all that information in there. So we're going to put curve tags in there, okay? Now, in order to do the curves, I need to break these guys up. So I'm going to show you a little trick you can use. Because you can't pick two endpoints, okay? You have to pick the arc, and it just labels the arc for you. So this arc is fine. He's a good arc. We don't have to mess with this one. This one is not, because it goes past that, okay? So what we're going to do, we're going to use an AutoCAD tool called Break At. So I'm going to go back to the Home tab. Under the Modify command, you have two options there. You have the normal break command, and then you have what's called break at a point, okay? So in order to use this effectively, you probably want to have your endpoint O snap on. I'm not sure what I have on, so I'm going to turn this on first. Okay, yeah, endpoint's good. So if you don't have your endpoint snap on, make your endpoint set, and if you have any other snap, get rid of them, okay? So just make sure it's endpoint, okay? So if you've never used this tool, what it's going to do is it's going to break this guy in two at that endpoint for you. So we're going to go here, and this is an AutoCAD command, by the way. This is not a Civil 3D. I'm going to say break at, select your arc, and then select that endpoint. Now, it doesn't look like it did anything, but if you click there, you'll notice there's an arc, and there's also an arc now, okay? So that's what I wanted to achieve. So this arc is good. I don't need to break that one, but I need to break this arc. So I'm going to come up here again, break at, select the arc, hit the endpoint, break at point, select the arc, hit the endpoint, break at, select the arc, hit the endpoint. Okay. So the downside to this is that we're breaking that object up into multiple objects, but the plus side is it's going to let me label it. And in a couple of weeks, in 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about parcels, and they will handle things a little differently so that you don't necessarily have to break things up. All right, so we're ready to label now. Now what we're going to do is I'm not going to worry about the label because I'm going to let this be handled through that table, and then I'm going to edit the table style. So I am going to go now over to annotate. Is everybody with me so far? Any questions? All right. So I'm going to label. I'm going to label a line and a curve, label line and curve segments. And I'm just going to do, a distance only because I'm actually going to replace them with tags. So it's just easier. So I'm going to do distance only, add it. So I'm going to come up here, select that. Notice how that looks real whacked out. I'm going to come here, select that arc, select that arc, select that arc, that arc, that arc, and that arc. And I think we got them all. Oh, I missed this one. Now I put that out of sequence, but the way I'm going to select them, it'll fix it. Okay. Anybody see anything I missed? So I'm going to go ahead and close this and hit the escape key. So notice these two guys are on the wrong side. So I'm going to pick these two guys, right click, and flip them. That one's good. These are all on the wrong side of the arc. Just going to select each one, right click, and flip it. Okay. So that actually might be okay if you really were big enough scale, but obviously this isn't going to work. So we're going to build a curve table out of all of these. Okay. And so what we're going to do is add a curve table. So I went to my add tables, line and curve tables, add a curve table. Okay. So we're going to let it do a length, a radius, and a delta. There's other options in there. You can do some other ones or create your own. So it's going to give me the length of arc, the radius, and the delta angle. I'm going to go ahead and select my tags. I always try to select my tags in the order that I want them to show up. You can actually change those things after the fact, but it's a little harder. So I'm going to get that one first, this one next. Let's see, that's an arc. That's an arc. That's an arc. So I've got all of my arcs now that I need. Remember, I can always add these later. Going to go ahead and hit OK. Convert. And I'm good to go at this one. So I'm going to hit OK. And generate, there's my curve table right there. So also notice those have now been changed to C1, C2, C3, C4. I think these will move out, but they don't seem, okay, that one does have a, see, I can actually pull that one out like that, and it has a way of doing it that way if it's too close. They don't always function that way. Let's look at our curve table. So what this is giving me is the length of arc, the radius, the delta angle, the chord direction, and the chord length. And you'll notice, well, the chord direction is to 1 second of arc, but delta is only to 2 decimal places of degrees, and it's not showing me degrees, minutes, seconds. So we're going to change that up. We have to add the foot mark to the length, the radius, and the length. And you might notice yours might be different, but mine came in different orders. So I've got C1 to C8 to C3. That's pretty annoying. So I'm going to fix all of that. Okay. Did everybody get their curve table to generate first off before we do the edits?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on this guy, right click, and we're going to go to edit the table style. Okay. So the one thing I want to do is sort the data. So I'm going to go ahead and sort the data. I'm going to toggle that on. I'm going to go to the length. I'm going to double click length. That's good because it's 2 decimal places, but I need a foot mark after this. So I'm going to click up there and put the foot mark. Okay, that. Go to the radius. That's also good, but I need a foot mark here. Foot mark. The delta's not good. So what I want to do on this one, for that segment, click on that segment. It's under decimal degrees. So I want to make that a degree, minute, second. Precision, I want that to 1 second of arc. I mean, don't forget to promote it. That's really, really, again, easy to do. I do that all the time. I'll make all those setting changes and forget to promote it. Go ahead and okay that. Chord direction was good. So the chord length, I believe we need to add a foot mark. I'm going to put a foot mark here. I'm going to okay that. I'm going to okay that. And notice my table now is right where I want it. I got my things sorted out. Foot marks are in there. Now I'm looking at a delta in degree, minutes, second, and I'm good to go. Okay, any questions?
Do you have to add your labels before you create your table?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Now, you can actually add a tag or you can add a label. You may have noticed before there wasn't a tag option, was there? Did you guys see that? There wasn't a tag option. Because we've created tags now, I'm not sure why this is, but if I go back to the label or the add labels under either the lines or the curves, you'll notice there's a subset tag there now showing up under distance. So if I want to add another tag, I can either do a distance and select it, or I can just select another tag and do it. But that wasn't there before. That didn't show up. So that's like a child off of that parent. So once you create them, you'll have those tags that show up. But again,
So if you select that, then the dimension that you bring in will automatically appear in the table.
yeah, so for instance, let me just show you. If I click this, it may not automatically, I may have to add it, but let's see what happens. I'm gonna put a tag right there. Okay, notice it shows up as a tag. I'm gonna close that and flip it. Let's see, flip it. It may not automatically update, but let's see if it did. It didn't. So what you can do is click here. Let's see, you click your table. There's an add item there. And then you can tell it to select the item, go select your item, and okay it, and it should be in there now. Okay. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Also, there's a setting on here, static versus dynamic. Static mode means things won't update on your tables. That's probably not a good thing to do. I would always generate them so they're dynamic updates. You can always turn them off to static after the fact, but if you don't do that off the bat, then it could be a problem. All right. So these guys are pretty cool, actually. And notice also these are out of number sequence. There is a way to renumber them too. So there's a, let's see, it's hard to find, but it's in there. I forget, I found it the other day. But you can renumber them. I think you actually have to click on the tag and tell it you want it to renumber it. Yeah, there's a renumber tags there. And I think it just, it should, I don't think it, usually, well, see, that changed it, but you can renumber your tags. So, and notice it updated it. So you could set that to 1 and then it'll renumber them for you. So that's a little trickier, but it's doable. It's doable. All right, any questions? We've covered a lot. Like I said, we're going to be working on this stuff on Wednesday. You're going to be doing pretty much a similar thing to what I've got going on here, but it'll be good. You'll be doing it on your own, and the more that you, well, I'll be there working with you, but the more that you do this, the easier it's going to get, because there's always something you'll forget. And labels, all the labels are going to work similarly once you get into these things. All right, so let's take this into paper space real quick and just show you some things real quick. I'm just going to go into layout. Now, remember, normally we would insert our title block and then insert a viewport. So I'm just going to go and generate a viewport real quick. So I'm just going to type in mview, and I'm going to make my lower corner at 0, 0. And then my upper right, I'm going to make that 1625, which is about the same size of my paper would be, comma, 10 inches. So you should see your information come in. So what I want to do is rotate this. So if you remember, I showed you guys this on the other day. I'm going to go ahead and go a north arrow here. And the north arrow I like the best that's the best north arrow I think they've got. I'm going to click that viewport and generate that north arrow anywhere. And remember, it comes in very, very small. It doesn't recognize a scale. So you click on that block, and this will be your scale factor. You just probably want to generate it so you can see it. I think you could probably type in a value too, if you wanted to. So I'm going to rotate this north arrow, and it'll rotate this. So there's the rotation grip right there. You can tell it, I'm going to tell it to rotate. That's probably -90. Oops, I went the wrong way. I did that the other day. Try taking it this way. There we go, like that. So there's my site. I'm gonna go inside of this viewport now and pan it where I want it. Double click outside of my viewport, and let's set that, I'm gonna set that to a scale factor. See what works. Let's see what a 60 scale does. 60 scale might be a little bit too big. But notice as you're making these scale factor changes, that's a little too big, it looks like. 60, I might try a 70 scale. There we go. Every time you do that, your dimensions are gonna update for you, and they're gonna be, I think, 1/10 of an inch or 0.15 high. So when you change your scale factor, that's always gonna change for you. And notice, there you go. So you can see these guys are pretty big. So what we might have to do is knock them down in terms of their height. I think these labels right now are generated 0.15 high. So I think the sheet that I did it with you guys on was at 0.10, which is what we're gonna knock these down. You can notice the tags here. I think that's a 0.1 height and that's a 0.15 height. So depending on your scale factors and whatnot, you have to change that. So we could change the labels through the label style stuff very easily. So, and then you could generate another viewport for your tables, and they'll come in also. But the tables are a little bit harder to place. That's the one thing about them. They're a little bit harder to place. Okay, you guys might want to save this drawing if you want to utilize it to kind of maybe go back and look at it. But that's what we wanted to get into today. So we covered a lot of ground. Again, I'm going to go back to model space. We did a lot of the little routines in here under the draws. I showed you some cool little tools, especially that little break tool under the modifies. If we go to the analyze, you've got some nice tools in here. The line curve analyzation tools, and then you've got the angle. You'll be wanting to use that periodically just to check things. And then of course we did the annotation. So we started to delve in pretty good into labels, and we were doing label styles, creation, label editing, and then tables creation and then editing. Anybody have any questions?
Back to the label sizes in paper space, if you change your scale factor here in model space, will that fix it when you go back to paper space, or do you actually just need to change edit the style?
That's a really, really good question. Now, what will happen here is it will affect both of these guys when I change this style. Notice I'm at a 50 scale. I'm going to put it in at a 70 scale. That's kind of like what it looks. Notice when I go back to paper space, there's absolutely no change. Okay. So this really just shows you what it's going to look like, okay, at a 70 scale. However, this number does impact these guys, okay? So you have to be really careful with your tables. So your tables really act really strangely in paper space. They'll work, but if you want to have this at a 70 scale in paper space, then you want to make sure this is set to 70 before you go into paper space. Otherwise, they won't work right, okay? Now, to answer your question, though, I think I answered it, but these are too big, okay? That's the bottom line here. So to fix that, you're going to have to go to your label style. So let's just do that real quick because I want to show you how this will change. If we click on this guy, right click and go to edit label style, we're going to do the bearing and distance label style. All right, I want the, I don't know if I can get it in general. General sometimes has heights of text, but this time it doesn't. So I'm going to have to go to the layout. And I'm going to have to go to the feature that I want to change it on. In this case, it's the bearing. And remember, the bearing in this case has both the distance and the direction component. So you might see right there, there's a text height. What I'm going to do is just change that to a new text height, 0.1. I'm going to go ahead and apply that and okay that. And notice those got smaller, but those didn't, because that was only that label style we fixed. We go back to paper space, you'll notice those are all fixed, but the other ones aren't. So you're going to have to go and do that for each one of them. I'm probably going to recommend you use 0.1 for most of your labeling, which is pretty standard. I think 0.15, you can see it's pretty high, it's pretty big for most cases. So, but yeah, I would have to change each one of these. I would have to change my distance ones and my bearing over distance ones to make that work. But you can notice some of them already are at 10. This one is at 10. But what's interesting about this, do you notice that when you drag it, it goes to a 10 unit height, but when it's in a non-drag state, it's not. So watch what happens when I drag this. See how it changes size? Because the original one was at 0.1 and the newer one is at, I'm sorry, 0.15. And when you drag it, it's at 0.1. So that's kind of weird the way they do it. They have the drag state different than the normal state. But okay, any questions? There's probably going to be a lot of them as you get into it. You might notice that my bearings look kind of whacked out there. I think if you regen, they should, yeah, they'll update automatically to what they should be. So you sometimes do have to force regenerations. Okay, no questions, anybody? All right, so Wednesday, I'll have us working on an assignment. I'm gonna stop the recording now. Let me do that and then see if there's any questions, and I can stick around. I'm gonna